Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we try to inform you of a lot of great theories out there that you probably never heard of before. And if you did, they might change your views on a lot of things. We've done a lot of theories of everything, and including the reciprocal system of theory, but now we've been doing a lot of Bible decodes as part of our reciprocal church unit. And the reciprocal church is basically the decentralized church, one over church, which is 8 billion separate religions for each person, depending on their own experience and their own practice. So we're trying to give people tools that they can use to syncretically construct their own system of reverence for the divine, based on what works for them and what resonates. And then we've kind of gotten into the reason why it's necessary to kind of open up this parachute of having practices for yourself to syncretically construct your own religion, because all of the major Western religions are in the process of crashing and burning. And that includes Christianity and Judaism, Islam, Satanism, and atheism or scientism. All of them have been discredited, and society just kind of hasn't caught up to it yet. But they're catching up fast, and we are showing you some of this evidence with these Bible decodes, in particular the New Testament. And so the New Testament really speaks to the Christianity and also the Satanism. Satan isn't really a part of the Old Testament, mentioned just a few times, and in each case it's really like an impediment or an obstacle, not really a supernatural, Manichaean kind of all-encompassing evil that it has become, pursuant to the New Testament, but also more even pursuant to the works of Dante and Milton, but especially due to Hollywood. And the same is true of Jesus. A lot of the things that we think about Jesus are just really not in the book. They are in Hollywood portrayals. And also the church fathers and some of the other, influencers over the centuries, but especially Hollywood again. And we've been really, focused on the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament, that the New Testament is actually 100% fiction, or at least, fiction can be based on a true story, but it was written as a psychological operation, a psyop, written by the Romans, the Caesars, and in particular the Caesars from the Flavian dynasty of Caesars. Those are the Caesars that ruled the Roman Empire from 69 to 96 AD. That is Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Emperors Titus and Domitian. And they basically wrote it in order to mellow out or prune or domesticate the Jews, to tame the Jews. Because the Jews, they had just gotten done fighting a 7-year-long war against the Jews, called the War of the Jews, 66 to 73 AD. And this was just the culmination of over 100 years of constant revolt and uprising and rioting of the Jews because of their, monotheistic God that referred to them as the chosen people, and all of God's desires of them performing all of these kind of idiosyncratic and quirky rituals, circumcision, kosher food laws, strictures against graven images, and animal sacrifice laws. These were all things that made it more difficult on the Romans to govern the Jews. And these were all rituals that the Jews were willing to die in order to, many Jews were willing to die in order to keep these rituals. And so it just led to all of these conflicts between them. And they were super high maintenance for the Romans to govern them. The Romans wanted you to be a good citizen. They wanted you to be law-abiding and hardworking. And so these are, kind of the results that have persisted in Christianity to this day. Christians are generally law-abiding, good citizens that work hard, because the Caesars wrote it into the story. So they wrote it into the Gospels to be that way. And they backdated the story by a little over 40 years, set it in the early 30s AD. And at the same time, they wrote this history of the War of the Jews. And Emperors Titus and Vespasian were both veterans of that war as generals. They were both wounded in the war, came back to Rome, and, said, what are we going to do about the Jews? And they reached into their bag of tricks. As Romans, they had mastered the art of the psychological operation by that time. They had created a number of other religions already in the first century. Titus himself had created 2 religions. Or I won't say that. He eventually at least created 2 other religions. Vespasian was also in the process of creating another religion called Rabbinical Judaism. And so they, backdated the Gospels, and at the same time, they wrote a history of this War of the Jews. And that's what they called it, War of the Jews, or Jewish War. And they wrote it under the name of Josephus, who, even according to his autobiography, is a member of the Flavian dynasty, an adopted member. He's known as Flavius Josephus. He was one of the court historians at Rome, living at Caesar's palace for his whole life, or the rest of his life, and after he was adopted by Vespasian. And he was one of the court historians. And so he wrote this 7-volume work. And when you read Josephus at the same time that you read the Gospels, the parallels become unmistakable. That whoever wrote Josephus also wrote the Gospels at the same time for the same reason, by the same people, whether it was Josephus or that's a pen name for somebody else, or whether it was a committee of people that went under the name of Josephus. Regardless, whoever that was, they also wrote the New Testament. And there are many different kind of families of parallels between the two. One is that, Jesus had a 3-year ministry in Judea from 30 to 33 AD. Titus had a 3-year military campaign in Judea from 70 to 73 AD. Every place, according to the work of Josephus, the history, every place that Titus went, Jesus also went, in the same order. And every place that they went, they encountered a certain adventure or a battle or some circumstance or event. And Jesus encounters the same or parallel, conceptually parallel events at the same locations, offset by exactly 40 years, sometimes to the hour. Okay, so they have parallel campaigns. Also, many of the prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are fulfilled in the pages of Josephus, and many of them are fulfilled by Titus. And so Titus is the second coming of Jesus, according to the text. And many ancient people understood this. In Josephus, there are 6 characters with the name of Jesus, and 6 separate characters with the name of Jesus, and all 6 of them are, in one way or another, a parody or a parallel to the Jesus in the Gospels. The life of Josephus that is described in War of the Jews is also a parallel of the life of Jesus. Okay, so there are just many different parallels. They're uncanny. Some of them are downright eerie. Many of them are mean-spirited, mocking, and ridiculing. The Romans loved to play these games. Word games, enigmas, puzzles, riddles, codes, typologies, puns. These were entertainment for the Romans. And I'm sure that, the book was passed around at Caesar's palace, and, everybody got a good laugh at the Jews for, all of the inside jokes that were mockeries. Now, what we're looking at is a book from Michael Menescotz, Menasgotz, called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And he's one of many authors who have been proffering the Roman origins hypothesis. And what he does is he digs into the book of Luke, looking for parallels with War of the Jews. And, as he says, many of them are inside jokes. It's a lot of times you have to know some supplemental information before the information in front of you begins to make sense. So he admits that I'm sure there are a lot of parallels that I'm missing, that I'm not seeing. Nonetheless, he found over 250 parallels just in the book of Luke. Luke is only got 24 chapters. That's over 10 per chapter. And it's only got 1,151 verses. So that's one every less than 5 verses. There's a new parallel. Some of the parallels go on for verse after verse after verse. So what I'm saying is that the parallels thoroughly saturate the book of Luke. And not only that, but Menescotz graphed it out, meaning he made a chart with the book of Luke on the vertical axis, War of the Jews on the horizontal axis. Every time he found a parallel, he plotted the point. When he got done plotting the 250 points, he had made 5 near perfect letters in Latin. Latin being the language of the Roman Caesars. Now, the New Testament itself is written in Greek, as is Josephus. Although Josephus makes some comment that the original version is written in the father tongue, which scholars have taken to be Chaldee for whatever reason. But the New Testament is written in Greek, which is also the language of the Romans. That was kind of more the common language used in Rome at this time, whereas the Latin was more for the elites. The elites also knew Greek and wrote in Greek and Latin. Whereas in Judea, Greek was much more rare. Only the elite would have been speaking in Greek. Jesus, had he existed, would have been speaking Aramaic. And so the fact that it's written in Greek is already a red flag. But then when you add the fact that the Romans had a monopoly on publishing, on censorship, on distribution, it kind of makes it that the Romans were the only people who would have been capable of putting out thousands of copies of this gospels, in particular this Gospel of Luke. Those letters in Latin are APTVS, the TVS undoubtedly for Titus Vespasianus. And then, so basically, we've got the motive, the method, the motive. You know, they're trying to mellow out the Jews, so they propose a Jewish Messiah. The Jews are waiting for a Messiah. They propose a Jewish Messiah who's a Prince of Peace and believes in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, walking an extra mile with this Roman soldier's pack, turning the other cheek to oppression, and so on, while at the same time overturning the temple, overturning the money tables of the money changers who are Jews outside the temple, so they can't change the dirty money for the kosher money without the graven images all over it, so that it can be used for the offering in the temple, and also the merchants that are out there selling pigeons and doves for the animal sacrifice. These are things that Jesus takes direct aim at, the Jewish rituals, while at the same time being utterly deferential to Rome. So this is another piece of evidence that it's the Romans that wrote the New Testament. But I think the most powerful evidence is the 250 parallels, and Maniscalco goes through all of them here, and some of them are very, very powerful. Some of them are very weak, and some of them are just there to get a dot. But some of them are extremely intricate and well thought out in a very evil way. Yeah, so we're going to look at a few of these right now. So this one is from Jewish War 266. That is Book 2, Chapter 9, Paragraph 3, from Josephus. Jews objected to images of Caesar in the temple and came and lay down in protest, prostrate, lying immovable for 5 days. Pilate sat on his tribunal at the marketplace, and Pilate ordered the soldiers to draw their naked swords. But the Jews fell down and exposed their necks, causing him to refrain. The Jews came again to protest that Pilate had used the temple money to build an aqueduct. But Pilate ordered the soldiers not to use swords, but instead use their staves. Now, I thought that I've gone over this. Maybe I didn't do the second half of it because I remember, okay, we'll just finish this one. Okay, Antiquities, his other book, 20 volumes, Antiquities of the Jews, expands on this, saying that the soldiers went beyond his orders and a great many were slain. And about this time, there was a wise man called Jesus the Christ. This is the, part that the Christians cling to about Josephus, that he is the only first century author to corroborate the existence of Jesus right here. He does it also in the Antiquities. Or maybe this is coming from Antiquities. But in the Antiquities, he gives a whole paragraph to it. So I think it's just this offhand comment in the War of the Jews. Antiquities was written much later than War of the Jews. Okay, Jesus called the Christ, who Pilate condemned. And after this Jewish war describes the next emperor, Gaius or Caius Caligula, as taking himself to be a god. Now this is matched up with Luke 22:45 to 53. Jesus found them sleeping for sorrow. After Judas betrayed Jesus, they said, "Lord, shall we smite with the sword?" And one cut off the high priest's ear. But Jesus said, "Suffer ye thus far," and healed him. And Jesus said, "Do you come out with swords and staves?" Which is exactly what is said by Pilate. Do not use swords, but use staves. You stretch forth no hands against me. Okay. So he says here, Pilate parallels the prostrate despair and the indecision in Luke about whether to smite with swords or staves. Notice that Jewish war takes the opportunity to mention here how Pilate condemned Jesus. Yes, that's Jesus Christ that Jewish war is discussing here. Some scholars have assumed that such references were added to Jewish war by copyists in later centuries, partly because they do indeed give the impression of being added within otherwise coherent narratives. However, once we understand that the author himself was trying to stick relevant references to Jesus into Jewish war at the exact places needed to create the APTVS pattern, there is no need to hypothesize that this was done by later copyists. Okay, he puts in a footnote, the major translation of Josephus in English was done by William Whiston, who was actually Isaac Newton's predecessor. Or Isaac Newton was his predecessor as a professor, I guess, at, I don't remember where Newton was at, London, Oxford, I'm not sure where Newton was. But so his translation in 1737 remains very popular, and it includes a footnote pointing out that this passage references Luke 13:1, which seems strange to me. Luke 13:1, there were present at that season some that told him of the Galileans, whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. So that's also supposed to be a parallel to that section that we read there, where Pilate spilt the blood of his people at his tribunal near the temple where they performed their sacrifices. Okay, let's turn the page and see where we go from here. Okay. Now, I swear we've gone over this. We'll try it again. This is Jewish War 281, Book 2, Chapter 12, Paragraph 1. A soldier is described making an insult at a feast leading to tumult, requiring armed men to suppress it, and who killed a great many Jews, such that the feast became a mourning. The number killed was 10,000, according to some copies of the text, 30,000 according to other copies of the text. Antiquities of the Jews expands on this, saying the soldiers came to the fortress of Antonia, the Tower of Antonia, before killing 20,000. So I don't know whether it's 10,000, 20,000, or 30,000. Luke 14:28 to 31 says, "For which of you, intending to build a tower, sits not down first and counts the cost? Or what king, going to make war, does not consult whether he be able with 10,000 to meet 20,000?" So here we have another reference to specifically 10,000 and 20,000 men in regard to a tower. This shows that the author was quite content to reuse an earlier trick and may reflect that the first half of Jewish war was added in a comparatively rushed manner after Luke had been published. The A and the P in particular, and possibly the T, he thinks might have been written by Domitian or another emperor, or maybe just another faction within the court of these Flavians. Okay, this is Jewish War 293, Book 2, Paragraph 13, Chapter 13, Paragraph 5. "Now an Egyptian prophet led his followers to the Mount of Olives," and Antiquities adds that he then claimed that the walls of Jerusalem would fall at his command. But the Romans attacked him and dispersed and killed his followers, but he disappeared. And this is matched up with Luke 19:45, along with 21:5. Jesus, who had been in Egypt as a child, prophesied that the walls of Jerusalem would fall at the time of his second coming. And these things would happen within one generation. Jesus went out and abode in the Mount of Olives. The chief priests and scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. That is Luke 22:2. And finally, this description of an Egyptian prophet offers a parody of Jesus going to the famous Mount of Olives with the Romans seeking to attack him. Along with those parallels, which I thought were less interesting and relegated to Appendix 1, that concludes the list of parallels between Luke, as backed up by Matthew, Mark, and John, and Jewish war, as backed up by the Slavonic version of Josephus as well as the Antiquities. While a handful of parallels that might be considered noteworthy do not conform to the pattern shown below, these are the exceptions, and most of them were probably accidents resulting from the repeated editing and rearrangement of the text. Despite those few, it is clear that the intentional parallels preferentially appear in the pattern shown below. That's the APTVS pattern you can see on the thumbnail for the video, which is clearly the Latin word apt or fitting, which prior to the invention of the letter U, and indeed lowercase letters, was spelled APTVS. So that's another interpretation of what that word APTVS, or that is APTUS, is aptus, meaning apt. But I think that Titus Vespasianus, the beginning would be Arius Piso or Aegion Pneuma. I like those options better, but regardless, the main point is that the Romans literally not only wrote the Gospels, but they signed their names to them so that they would be discovered in due time. And I'm sure they didn't think it was going to take 2,000 years. But we're getting there. Okay, flipping the page again. And trying to get it focused. I had thought the bulk of my research had ended in June 2023, but during the following 12 months, I found more parallels, in some cases just by noticing links that had eluded me previously, in other cases from reviewing work from Henry Davis or by revisiting Joseph Atwill's books, and in others from the research published by Cliff Carrington. The result was that the APTBS pattern was revealed in even more detail, as shown below. And I think that is the result that you see on the thumbnail. Really, like the blue dots are where Jesus is parodying Josephus, and the black dots are where Josephus is parodying Jesus. So it goes both ways. You can't really say that one is mocking the other. It's a mutual thing, meaning that they were written by the same people at the same time. Okay, with that, the pattern is complete to the best of my knowledge, although I am certain that more parallels will be found. So I now turn to the anomalous group that is found between the T and the V. You can see that there's about 10-15 dots there that are kind of like straggling there between the T and the V. I believe he's going to move those up to the top to fill in that T. And I'm not sure how he's going to do that, so that should be worth figuring out. The parallels forming a diagonal line in much the same order in both stories, which is the right-hand side of the V, which primarily involved Jesus parodying Titus and Vespasian, were there to help guide initiates of the secrecy cult to accept Titus as the second coming of Jesus. And it's possible that those which aren't needed for the APTBS pattern would simply be ignored when it came to revealing that pattern. However, the possibility I tend to favor is that, having constructed the parallels in this fashion, someone in Titus's propaganda team had the bright idea of leaving a hint in the